Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries podcast, where we try and cut through any rumour or misinformation and give you the straight full facts about injuries in the Premier League. Today we are talking about Kieran Trippier's injury. Ben, what's the latest on that situation?
Latest confirmed fracture of the fifth metatarsal. Expected to undergo surgery, though no official comment from the club, and we don't know at this point when that will happen. But yeah, it isn't great. We expect a significant spell out on the sidelines. Again, nothing in terms of a time frame from the club. Just hope and pray as a Newcastle supporter, it's going to be sooner rather than later.
So, Raj, why is this injury a bit worse than a lot of people are making it out to be? You know, a lot of people have said, oh, he should be back in maybe 4 to 5 weeks. But then Ben has kind of put out the data that usually the return to play is actually around 80 days.
Yeah, it's just one of those, the area is such that it's sensitive because it has low blood supply. There's also a lot of attachments to that bone at that point, which impairs healing. And that's actually why they go in and they put, if it's a Jones fracture, which is a certain part, which I'm pretty positive it is, just based on how they're kind of talking about it and surgery being indicated, is that it just takes longer to heal because it's a sensitive area. So you can't rush this back because it can lead to significantly longer timeout. So you have to be pretty methodical with that return to play.
And with this type of injury, then it wouldn't heal by itself either, would it?
It can. I mean, usually it's not indicated in this case because of what I talked about, the blood supply and the attachments to it. So it can heal, but there's a I think it's like a less than, if I remember correctly, treating this conservatively, there's like a 30% rate of malunion, meaning not healing well. And so, however, when you pin it, I for example, I have a pin in my left foot of the same injury, Jones fracture. It's over a 95% success rate. So it just significantly increases the odds, but the timeline is still extended.
And so just adding to this in terms of the musculoskeletal situation there, Raj, is there a high risk of re-injury once he's had this kind of put in, or is this going to be a fairly smooth sailing situation?
I mean, typically you'll have soreness and discomfort, but that's part and parcel when you're returning from any fracture. The big risk, not even a big risk, but some people do have irritation with that screw sometimes. And so that can irritate the outside of the foot, especially if you're wearing tight cleats. And because that screw is placed, it's on the outside of the foot, so it's relatively superficial. That can cause some irritation potentially. But typically the outcomes are pretty good.
Moving it back to you, Ben, with the timeline then, when do you expect to see him back? Is it going to be before the end of the season, or kind of using Raj's favourite phrase, I'm stealing it this week, the risk versus reward situation? Are the club going to look at it and kind of go, we'll keep him till the next season?
It's going to be difficult, and this is where we talk about, external influence and factors, and where Newcastle may or may not be as we approach those sort of final few games of the season. My initial thoughts there, would be that we'd hopeful to be targeting a return in maybe early May. But there's the assumption there that that surgery's been done quickly, it's been successful, and that recovery and rehabilitation processes went smoothly without any kind of major setbacks. You'll need to consider where Newcastle are at that point in time. Now, if we're safe, then do we really need to be pushing somebody like Kieran Trippier to come back into that team for what effectively would be dead rubbers? But if we're still in the fight and there's still a chance of survival and we have some big games coming up, then maybe, it's a chance. Certainly Kieran Trippier would want to be involved in those games. And Eddie Howe will as well. So those will be decisions and questions to ask nearer the time. But, so much as this 5 to 6 week timeline that a lot of people seem to be suggesting, there's a lot of so-called experts climbing out the woodwork to offer an opinion. All I would say is, certainly in terms of the data that goes back over the last 12 years, They are very much the exception rather than the rule. Those players returning before actually 80 days. We only have a small number of players, and so it's going to be tight for Kieran Trippier.
And so, Raj, what is the recovery process for this once he's kind of had that operation? Because a lot of time people get very excited when they see players out on the training pitch. I mean, is there going to be a period where he might be training with the team or in the gym where people need to kind of temper their expectations?
Yeah, I mean, he'll likely be not weight bearing for a little bit to allow for further healing. The biggest thing, the big step is getting him back to some partial weight bearing, and then you progress that. And then, as Ben and I have talked about, it's all about now functional training is about getting them out and doing certain activities. But, being able to walk in a gym without any devices, it doesn't really tell you all that much. It's not putting that much load on the body. And so you're going to see, as we see with all the other players returning from injury nowadays, just a progression. You'll see him in the gym, likely doing some low level work that'll progress, whether it's through running. You probably start in the pool, or if they use what's called an Ultra G treadmill just to increase weight, and then as he's comfortable with that, they'll get into more balls, football specific work. And then finally he'll go into individual training on the pitch, and then finally on to team training. Now, sometimes, for example, we saw this with Phil Foden. They actually had him doing stuff on sand before he went onto the grass. So there's always ways to progress, and but it's all about just gradual progression.
Will some of that progression also be helped or hindered by potential kinesophobia as well? Is that something that he'll be working on, or is that again kind of individual case by case, player by player basis?
It is. I think in this case, this is a contact injury, so that tends to be a little bit lower because there's a reason for it, and so that's always a consideration for any player coming back. I think bigger than that is refining his fitness and refining his rhythm. And I think to Ben's point, it really comes down to, the risk reward aspect is if they need him to play in games to stay up. And there's a lot of money involved there, obviously, especially with the aspirations of the new owners. So
I'm so glad that you said risk reward as well. It's not a Premier Injuries podcast without that phrase being thrown out there. Just one final question to you, Ben, as you are the resident Newcastle fan. Are you worried about how much this is going to knock the chances of the team? Because it's more than just the player, it's the psychological impact to the team as well. Because you were flying high. He was so involved in so many of the good bits of the attack and the overhaul recently because the defensive numbers have improved as well.
I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, since his arrival at the club, we've seen an upturn in performances, particularly those last three results have been huge. So yes, he's going to be a miss. That would be the long and the short of it. Is it a worry? Is it a major concern? Look, I think Dan Burn coming into the team last weekend and the performance on Sunday against Aston Villa, that gives us hope as well. And maybe, I'm looking at how Eddie Howe could potentially set up his team. I could maybe see a tweak of formation, and going with maybe Lascelles, Shaw, and Dan Burn in a 3, and then maybe opt in 4-5 in midfield with 2 wing backs and bringing in Bruno. And Bruno's looked impressive from the bench. Now, Eddie Howe said he's fit, he's ready, he's sharp. He just hasn't had that opportunity from the beginning because of the performances of late. But this opens a door for him, and I think that could bring another dynamic to Newcastle, and it's exciting to see another one of our January signings, hopefully in that starting 11.
I mean, Raj, do you share that positivity about Newcastle?
yeah, I think some of the signings have definitely reinforced. Obviously, Kieran was a big one, but I think the fact that he's at least built some of that momentum and given the team maybe some margin for error is going to be important. And I think the fact that he's also there behind the scenes as well, right? He's not like completely gone. He can at least provide some support in that regard, what he's seeing, how to help the guys. And I think with Dan Burn as well, providing some of that leadership, that's going to be quite important for them. So I can't say I watched Newcastle enough to give any more detail on them, but I think just from what we've seen since, some of these new players have come in, and there's definitely been a shift in their level of play and level of performance. And so we'll see if that continues.
Raj, can I seen a post. I was just trying to have a look on your timeline there to see if I could find it. I can't,
Yeah.
and I'm skipping. But I know initially you had said that you'd read some research with regards to potential return to play for fifth metatarsal fracture in and around that 4 to 6 week period. I had actually read that as well, and in that the I suppose the contraindications of returning to play sooner rather than that maybe 8 to 10 week assumed timeline ish. Was no real sort of greater. Now, is that sports specific, or is that something? Was that a fairly isolated research paper? With a fairly small data set.
Yeah, it was more. You didn't even call it like individual case studies more than anything for expedited return to play protocols. We've seen the same thing, for example, with like high ankle syndesmotic sprains for players coming back in like 15 days in college American football here. But there's always significant knock-on effects for that. So, but you're always going to have those anecdotal, right? And so I think, again, risk reward. So the risks shoot way, way, way up in those cases.
Yeah, I was reading a research paper. I think was it David Miller 2018, and that was talking about the mean time for return fractured fifth metatarsal in and around that 8.5 to 10.5 week period. So yeah, unfortunately, it looks as if he's in a race against time to play against it again this season.
And well, hopefully everybody will be joining us for the rest of the season, though. Hit that subscribe button. Do leave a comment if you've enjoyed this video, and leave a like as well, because we like to know that you have enjoyed it. But for now, this is this week's Premier Injuries podcast. We will be back again next week as usual, and we hope to see you then.